How are you all feeling? Yeah, I know. There's rage, but perhaps there's also a little bit of joy, of the collective strength that we're here today, that we can make a difference. I hope some of you have felt that also in the streets in the last few weeks that we were together in protest. And this is something that we want to continue today. So my name is Chris de Ploeg. I'm one of the co-founders of Arts of Resistance. I'm a writer and an organizer, and I'll be moderating the panels. And since Ikram already gave the excellent introduction, I'm going to keep it very short. So just to be clear, the QR codes where you can support ELSC, to support the activism that we need, are all on the walls. You can also find them in the back where we have some stands with more info. I'll tell more about that later. But for now, all I want to say is we're going to have some really great speakers to talk with. There will be 2 panels. All the speakers will still be there at the end for you to ask questions. So be patient, write them down, and we will get back to you before the end. So, oh yeah, the last thing. Please, all the people in the middle, feel free to come a little bit to the front. To, the people who are sitting, they don't bite, is all fine. Also, for the elders here or people who need a seat for whatever reason, I still see 1 seat there. Maybe some people also don't really need it. Maybe you can discuss. So if you need it, feel free to ask people. So with that being said, I'm going to announce our guests for today. So I'm very happy to have them here. Lowkey, first of all, is what I believe is one of the most potent, and I don't even know if he needs an introduction, but I'll do it anyways. He's one of the most potent and electrifying conscious rappers alive today, whose razor-sharp lyrics teach us about racism, war, imperialism, and global poverty. He's also known for his long-time engagement with the Palestinian struggle for liberation, among other things with Palestine Action UK. And since 2022, he's also a journalist and a host of a podcast at Mint Press News. Please give him a warm applause. And he'll be joined in the first panel by Dina Zbeidy. She's an anthropologist and lecturer researcher at Leiden University of Applied Sciences. She has conducted research on colonialism, nationalism, social movements, refugees, development organizations, and human rights education, among other things, with a special focus, of course, on her homeland, Palestine. Please give her a warm welcome. So Dina, I'm gonna give you the honor to start. And my first question, and I think this is where we need to start, because our politicians, Mark Rutte specifically, says that we don't need any context when we talk about this conversation. And everybody who's committing crimes, they don't want us to know the history. So we know that history didn't start on October 7th. Can you, and we spoke, Ikram already mentioned a little bit, but can you expand on this a bit more? What are the essential things we need to know about the 100-year struggle against colonialism and apartheid of the Palestinian people?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think it's interesting to listen to when politicians say we do need context and nuance, and when they claim we don't need it. And I think when we say, around 40,000 people dead, almost half children, and they say, yeah, but October 7th, then they need that context. So we can't just talk about dead Palestinians on their own. But having said that, yes, I think, so what is important, so I usually give lectures about context for 2 hours. I won't do that here. But I think the most important thing to always bring up also in discussions when you're talking to other people is that we can only understand what is happening now if we understand and live from the point of departure of inequality of power and oppression. So if we start from the point of a departure where we see that there's an occupier and an occupied, an oppressor and an oppressed, then we can start a conversation. But if you don't even want to acknowledge that, then there's really nothing to talk about. So I think that context is very important. So again, I will not give you a history of the last century. But again, what is important to always get back to and to always remind people of is indeed that this started over 8 decades ago, that the majority of Palestinians alive today are refugees who have been displaced, or forcibly removed for over almost 8 decades. About 500 plus villages destroyed in Palestine. But of course, that if we have to acknowledge also that Israel started as a project of settler colonialism. And what we mean with that, I mean, we all use those abstract concepts, but what we really mean with that is that it was set up as a state for one ethno-religious group, for the superiority of one, that recognized superiority of one ethno-religious group on the expense of the indigenous native people who were already living there. And where the struggle was always over land, right? So everything that Israel has done, even before 48, so before the establishment of the Israeli state, until today, we can see that it's about grabbing land, controlling Palestinian life, so also that every aspect of Palestinian individual and collective life is under the control of Israeli military. Whether it's about where you can live, where you can give birth, where you can go and study, where you can go and fish in the sea, whether you get shot or not, you know. So every aspect, financial, economic, social, is under the control of the Israeli state. So when you have people being in this situation, growing up generation after generation, that is not a natural state. That is not a just state for people to grow up. And if we cannot recognize that, then I think there's nothing to talk about.
Right, right. And, you know, just to bridge it also to the question I'm going to ask you, of course, Gaza in particular has suffered extremely in the last decades. It's basically a concentration camp where people cannot go in, they cannot go out. And we saw, even just 2 years ago, when people talk about October 7th, right? We saw with the Great March of Return what happens when people walk peacefully to the concentration camp wall. They basically get shot. You know, 300 were killed, 9,000 were wounded. Not a single dead Israeli soldier, of course, because there's just people walking. And this is the kind of context they don't want us to know. But with all that being said, the kind of things they tell about October 7th, like some of the statements have been so extreme. There are some writers claiming it was worse than the Nazis. They are talking about beheaded babies, systematic rape. They're trying to make it sound like something straight from hell, basically. And what did actually happen on October 7th? And I know, Lowkey, you have already spoken about this before. Can you expand a little bit on that?
I think to start with, it's important to establish that the Palestinians, according to 1212, the Palestinians, according to UN Resolution 3246,
No, it's fine.
they have the right of armed resistance. Any occupied people by foreign occupation, they have the right to armed resistance. While not all, but the main groups that took part in October 7th are prescribed within this political unit, which is the European Union, which represents a certain number of people, ostensibly. It's also prescribed organizations in Japan, prescribed organizations in the United States, prescribed organizations in Britain. All in all, that amounts to governments which represent less than 1 billion people. Okay, what about the government of Turkey, for example? It doesn't prescribe those organizations in that way. What about the government of China, which ostensibly represents over 1.4 billion people? It doesn't prescribe those organizations in that way. Same for Venezuela, same for Iran. So what you actually find is that the vast majority of humanity does not define Palestinian armed resistance as terrorism. The vast majority of humanity are post-colonial subjects, and they see themselves in the Palestinian experience. Now, to speak specifically about October 7th, what you saw was a military operation carried out by many different Palestinian factions. Again, some of them are not prescribed. In the midst of that operation, you have examples of Yasmin Porat, for example, who was a survivor from Kibbutz Be'eri. Now, this was somebody who, according to her testimony, this was an Israeli citizen who claimed that upon being taken by the Palestinian fighters, there then followed a period where Israeli tanks came and opened fire, not only on the Palestinians, but killed the captives that were with the Palestinians. Now, Many have argued, particularly an officer in the Israeli Air Force, that this was the application of something called the Hannibal Directive. Now, this is a historically present phenomena within Israeli military thinking, developed in Lebanon in the occupation, which began in 1982, whereby Israel seeks to avoid the risk of having people taken captive by the other side, and so they therefore take action which not only kills the other side, but also can kill the captives. That's not to say that the majority of the deaths on October 7th were because of that, but actually a significant proportion were. It wasn't only at Kibbutz Be'eri, it was also in the case of the Eretz crossing, which is the first military installation that a person will reach when leaving Gaza. You had the example of a general brigadier there who called in an airstrike on his own military base. You also have the example of Apache copters striking those who were fleeing. Now, a call has been released, the details of a phone call has been released in the last 24 hours, which shows that there was forewarning given to the Israeli military that these were people leaving with the exact phrase he uses, 50 واحد, يعني 50 شخص. So 50 people. So you have somebody from one of the Palestinian factions informing the Israeli military, we have 50 Israeli citizens with us. Now, what has become clear since then is that those 50 people were killed in a bombing by the Israelis, even though forewarning was given that this was taking place. Now, none of this is to take any particular position on what did or didn't happen on October 7th. It's simply for clarity and for posterity and for the historical record. It's important that we study these situations with as much detail as we possibly can, and we have an understanding of what exactly has led us to the genocidal point that we have today. And I think the important thing to be clear about is from the off, very clearly, Israel made its aims known, whereby the depopulation of Gaza was the objective. But what you have actually seen, and what is a true mainstay of the Palestinian story, is staying power, is the defining component of all of this, because Palestinians are still in Gaza. They have not successfully depopulated Gaza. And that is something that I think people should also take pride in. On top of that, you have seen a response from the region that I think has surprised both the United States and Israel, because they did not expect, you look at the Yemeni population, you are talking about per capita, some of the poorest people in the world. You're talking about people that have been subjected to the most intense British, US sponsored genocidal war over the past decade or so. And yet out of that, you have people that are willing to undergo US airstrikes in order to stand with the people of Gaza. That is something that history will look back on and see these people reaching out from their own suffering to clasp the hands of their brothers and sisters in Palestine. And really through that we see a future for the region. It's not represented by those that are normalizing with Israel. That is not the will of the vast majority of people in the region. And essentially what Zionism is in the region is an endless attempt to square a circle. It's a circle that cannot be squared. You cannot impose a settler colony on top of the heads of the people of this region. It won't work. It won't work.
Yes, please feel free to. Yeah.
I think also to get back to no, but just to get back to the question about October 7, and I think it is really interesting and really good to look at the details and what happened. The problem that I see happening now most often is that why do politicians and media bring October 7th is mainly to also find an excuse for what is happening right now. And the thing is, legally, and ethically, I think, there is no excuse for genocide. So it doesn't matter what happened on October 7th. I mean, it's good, we have to know, and we should want to know. And I think it will also be examined by all kinds of like military universities or whatever to see how that could happen. But it doesn't matter when it comes to genocide. And as an Israeli journalist said, Palestinians have been living in October 7th every day, and I think, yeah, so if someone asks, what about October 7th? We just have to ask back, well, what about October 8th and 9th and 10th and 11th until today? And I think this should, so again, if people really want to discuss October 7th and really understand what is going on and what happened, do that. But if they're mentioning October 7th to distract from what is happening now or to excuse Israel's actions, you tell them that it doesn't matter what happened on October 7th.
Yeah, that's a very crucial point, and it's also good to realize that this is standard tactic with any genocide. It's always claimed out of self-defense. They always demonize the people resisting. We see even, saying things in the Declaration of Independence in the United States. They're saying how Native Americans are massacring children and women and things like this. And even in some cases, this might be true, might have happened, but it doesn't really matter at all. So this is standard colonial tactics. Talking about what happened on October 8th and 9th and 10th and 11th, can you explain to us a bit more? We see sometimes on the news, we see these horrifying images. We see the horrifying images, of course, through the live streams and all that. But can you explain to us a bit more how the military machine of Israel has actually been operating over the last 8 months? What have they actually been doing? What's behind those images?
Yeah, so again, I think it's really interesting. I'm not a legal expert, so I will not go into much legal details about whether it's genocide or not. I don't also think that is now what's the most important. It will be more important later. But I think it did give me a way to understand Israel's intent, these legal jargon. And what I mean with it is, yes, it's about the death, the killing of people, of complete families, where you have hundreds of families who don't exist anymore, who are wiped off the planet. But what I think is also really interesting, as a scholar interesting, and as a person, as a human, frustrating and makes me want to scream, is that you also see the destruction of every form of life in Gaza. So what I mean with that is like water resource, water infrastructure, electricity infrastructure. There is no university standing anymore in Gaza, which means that even if the war ends today, what will be the future of those Palestinians? And as Lowkey, as you mentioned, that people are still there, and they will. I'm sure that they will be strong enough, together with all of us, to rebuild. But I see that Israel is really aiming to destroy as much as possible to make this rebuilding and to make this, to weaken them. So again, where are all the people going to study? Schools. No internet infrastructure, no sewage. You have sewage on the streets going and bringing illnesses to kids. The hunger. So even if now all the trucks enter and people can fend for themselves and again try and grow the land, there is no land, hardly any land that they can grow vegetables on. The sea, they're not allowed to go and fish. So they're really destroying every way for Palestinians to exist on that piece of land. So again, it's about the destruction of life. It's about the destruction of what you need in order to also exist. And I think this is again what made me really look closer to the genocide clause in legal terms, because it's not about only destroying people. As a legal scholar said recently, you can even be committing genocide without killing a single person. It's also about the mental damage that you put on those people. So again, those people, the Palestinian kids who have lost so much, their families, their schools, their classmates, how they will have to survive mentally, but also the destruction of the infrastructure for life.
Yeah, and I mean, even before October 7th, I remember there was a study in 2021 finding like 92% of kids in Gaza having PTSD. Like, it's utterly devastating already what was happening before, and the damage after. It's almost unimaginable. But I do want to get back to some of the last things you said, Lowkey, because you were bringing up that there is more going on than just what's happening in Palestine. The world is watching, and the world is not watching in the same way, right? And there was a statement from the Colombian president that I found Very telling. I think he was also one of the first heads of state that was calling it out as a genocide. And he was saying that this is also a warning, kind of, that the West, the collective West, that is supporting this genocide, is giving to the rest of the world. Because what we're seeing now is that the rest of the world is affirming itself. And we're living through an age where we're going to have collective climate breakdown, where we're going to have masses of refugees, where basically they are saying, if you try to change the world order, this is what you're going to get. This is kind of a warning. This is what Gustavo Petro was saying, the Colombian president. I'm interested to hear how you see his analysis, if you agree with it, and also if you can expand on that. Like, how is this struggle connected to the worldwide struggle for liberation?
So basically what they established in Gaza was a space of rightlessness. So you have a group of people penned into an area where they have complete reliance upon Israel for their sustenance, for their daily survival, down to the very calorie. Israel will calculate what will go in. Israel controls the sea, Israel controls the air, Israel controls the electricity. The only part of Gaza that Israel did not control was under the ground. Hence you have the necessity for the training under the ground. It would not be the case if Palestinians were able to assert clear sovereignty in the face of what Israel was doing. So it formed a kind of frictionless occupation. Now, just so we understand very clearly here, Germany increased its weapon sales to Israel by 1,000% during this period. It set up a fast-tracking system through which Israel could get deliveries, mainly of components, but also small arms. And most of the big arms comes from the United States, with components being made by Britain. The US, throughout this period, have on a daily basis been delivering arms to the Israelis at the Nevatim air base. A lot of that has been sent directly from CENTCOM in the Gulf, in US bases in the Gulf. The British have also been transporting weapons to the Israelis throughout this from the base in Cyprus, where the British have also been spying on the communications of resistance factions and passing that information to the Israelis. In addition to that, both the US and Britain have been sending spy missions over the top of Gaza to help with reconnaissance and probably targeting. What we also know, it was revealed by The Intercept, that the US had sent Air Force officers to help the Israelis with targeting. It's a level of sort of integration that probably existed in the past but was not made public in any way. The British, for example, have sent the R-1 Shadow plane above Gaza on a daily basis, really, since December. So the violence that's happening in Gaza is very much an expression from the global north. It's the collective global north is bringing down its military pressure, regardless of the PR exercises and regardless of what the politicians say, in a way that's a particular a sideshow to what actually happens on the military-to-military basis. And we can get into later on how the Netherlands figures into that. But in this case here, what we're talking about is Israel drawing upon support from the United States and Britain. You look at how Israel protected itself from the ballistic missiles and the drones that came from Iran fairly recently. They needed the British, they needed the US, they needed the Jordanians, and even intelligence help from the Saudis. But what you have now is those in the global south looking at this picture and saying, we don't relate to the US, Israeli, German, British side of the equation. So, for instance, the Chinese have been practicing, according to the Israelis, a form of sanction whereby things that have dual civilian and military use, China is not exporting to the Israelis since October 7th. Now, that's significant. In addition to that, you also have the Israeli claim that they found Chinese weapons in Gaza. Whether that means those weapons were actually sent with the knowledge of the Chinese government is a completely different issue. You also have Ali Baraka from the Maktab al-Siyasi, the Hamas, the political office of Hamas, stating very clearly that the Russians gave Hamas licenses to produce Kalashnikovs and Kalashnikov bullets locally in Gaza. This is something that, of course, angered and enraged the Israelis massively. All of these things are significant. And when you look at the Iranian strike on Israel, which was unprecedented, they used Bidu and another company that's a Chinese satellite system and a Russian satellite system to guide their missiles. Now, from the Israeli perspective, from the Zionist perspective, these are significant cracks, because previously they would have viewed themselves as having enough weight to prevent large states. And let's not forget, Iran is now a member of the BRICS. The BRICS includes both China and Russia. And ultimately, the way the future of humanity is forecast, China is due to overtake the United States as the world's #1 economy in all ways within the next decade or so. So you have a different world forming. And I think particularly in Latin America, you have governments that are looking at this and are thinking, if the United States and Israel can get away with this, if Israel can have the ICC and the ICJ on its back and the United States is willing to defend it to the hilt, then really there is no limit. There's no limit to what the United States will do when it wants to prove a point and punish the weakest, the wretched of the earth, as Frantz Fanon called them. So I think this is a moment of clarity for many people in the world, and whether Israel and the United States would be able to do things like this in the next decade or the next 2 decades, I would probably doubt it.
And we see that both ways, right? The collective North kind of backing Israel, but the other way around, if we're talking about Latin America, Israel was very deeply involved with a lot of the far-right dictatorships, specifically also with the paramilitaries in Colombia. And maybe one specifically also to mention is with the Argentinian dictatorship, which murdered and disappeared and tortured about 3,000 leftist Jews, which is more actually than the October 7th, when they say always this is the biggest massacre since October 7th of Jews. It's not actually true. So, when they talk about this kind of collective guilt, supposedly, that is driving them doing this, I say this also specifically as somebody who is a descendant of Jewish Holocaust survivors. Like, I don't believe for a second that any of that is true. And I will continue this conversation with you in the next panel. And you will come back with me, and don't worry, you get to ask your questions. But first, give them a big round of applause. So our previous speakers are coming back, but we'll be joined by 2 more. So I'll introduce them now. The first is Alice Garcia. She is the Advocacy and Communication Manager of the European Legal Support Center, which of course we have been mentioning a lot already. So she'll explain a bit more about the work that they're doing and why we're fundraising for them. And also, what I'm also very excited to have here with us is Rachid El Ghazaoui, better known of course by his stage name Appa, who is a Moroccan-Dutch rapper, activist and journalist who has supported also Palestinian liberation for over a decade. He recently quit music actually to focus on building an independent media outlet, The Bigger Picture, online to help us get different news, get the kind of news that we're hearing today. So I'm very happy to have you with us here. Yeah, please give a big applause. So I'm going to start with you. So all throughout Europe, and including the UK, as you say, we've seen repression of basically anti-genocide activists. Can you give us some examples of what you see in your work? Give us a picture of, and I'm also curious if you feel like you can actually help them with the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks everybody. It's really an honor to be there tonight. Also, thank you for organizing the event and giving the proceeds to the ELSC Legal Fund, because without this we would not be able to do the work, so it's really appreciated. Yes, so in the past 5 years, we've been defending hundreds of Palestinian rights activists throughout Europe who are facing anti-Palestinian racism and repression. So it can take the various forms. of censorship, but also police violence, arrests. Sometimes people are facing criminal charges as well, but also university proceedings, disciplinary proceedings in universities or workplaces, job dismissals as well. We have seen defamation cases, deplatforming. So yeah, it's always the same. Like basically, the repression is the justification of the repressions is false allegations of anti-Semitism or support to terrorism, or sometimes the denial of Israel's right to exist. And what we do is, so we provide direct legal support. So either through our lawyers or legal officers' expertise, and when we don't have the in-house expertise, then we refer advocates to a legal network. So we have the chance to work with a lot of sympathetic lawyers around Europe, including in the Netherlands. So that's awesome. And we also have publications, know your rights resources for protesters in the Netherlands, in the UK, in Italy. And anybody can request legal support. It's very easy. You can go on our website and fill a form, and we respond to everybody. So we really encourage to also just report the repression, because we also analyze anti-Palestinian trends and anti-Palestinian actors, and that way we can also inform our strategies with that and be able to best fight back. And also, we are not just a law firm, so we also use advocacy, because at the end of the day, we are there to achieve a political goal, which is supporting the efforts of Palestinians in their struggle for liberation. So it's really a combination of legal work and advocacy and activism and coalition work. It works. Most of the time it is effective, but really thanks to this combination, all of this. So I really want to give credit also to all the activists and the students, especially now. It's really impressive what they are doing. And in addition to challenging the repression, we are also taking legal action against private or public actors who are complicit in the ongoing genocide. So we're talking about weapons. It can be indeed by providing weapons to Israel, but also just by doing business as usual with Israel's apartheid regime and the settlements enterprise in the West Bank. So for instance, last week we went public with a complaint that we filed against Booking.com here in the Netherlands. We were not alone, actually. We were with Palestinian NGO Al-Haq and also Dutch NGO SOMO and the Rights Forum. And because despite years of warnings and calls, Booking keeps profiting from war crimes by listing accommodations in the Israeli illegal settlements. And it's time to end this complicity. This constitutes actually money laundering in the Netherlands. So that's why we went to court. And again, it's also why many activists are now protesting in front of the headquarters and launching direct action. So, and in Germany, we also launched a case against German government officials representing Gazan families for basically enabling the genocide by providing weapons. Of course, we face a lot of challenges because our European states are not done with colonialism and racism, so it takes time to put an end to these structures. But I think we also have to remember that we are actually on the side of justice, that our rights, either the rights of the Palestinians, but also as Europeans in solidarity with Palestine, are actually legitimate and protected by the law. So, onwards.
Yeah, but unfortunately, and that's the problem, is our government doesn't actually respect the law. And there's actually, when we were trying to get in touch with Appa, I couldn't reach him for 2 months. At first I thought he was just very busy, but it turned out that the police had confiscated his phone. And I believe they even disabled your email, right? Can you explain what actually happened? So this is very recently. I just finally got in touch with him a couple of days ago.
Yeah, well, basically what happened was they arrested me on the 4th of May. They kicked in the door. They arrested me with with the ski masks on and the bulletproof vest and the guns in my face, like I was, like my last name was Escobar or El Chapo, I don't know. But basically, it comes down to my activism. I was talking about the 4th of May because in Holland we have something we call it. We commemorate the deaths of the Second World War. We keep, 2 minutes silence, and I was speaking about these 2 minutes. I said the 2 minutes of silence is this year is very hypocritical because we're supporting a genocide, we're facilitating a genocide as the Dutch government is invested in this genocide, and my opinion was. Inside these 2 minutes of silence, wherever you are, at home, at work, eating in a snack bar, wherever you are, don't be silent these 2 minutes. Let the screams of Gaza be heard in these 2 minutes. And on basis of these words, they kicked in the door, they arrested me, took me to jail, and they confiscated my phone. And now the problem is I can't get in my emails. Luckily, I could get into my Instagram, but a lot of my socials I still can't get inside of. And the police is still playing games with my telephone. It's like I can't get it back. So it's a lot of back and forth with my lawyer to, try to get my phone back and get my business started again. So it's very difficult, but that's basically what it is.
Sounds like the Israeli police to me.
Yeah, exactly.
And then supposedly they want to respect the dignity of the commemoration. But actually we had an alternative commemoration on the 3rd of May. That was organized by several people, Jews, Palestinians. Umaya is also here. She was one of the organizers. But then we were doing it close to Anne Frank, and then they actually put fences around Anne Frank so that we couldn't place flowers there. I mean, that's how insulting they are. How much they actually respect the dignity of the dead.
Yeah, but is it insulting, or is it just another Zionist ideology, another Zionist tactic?
Exactly.
This is the Dutch government is basically a Zionist government.
Right.
That's what it comes down to.
So, so this is just one example. You have faced a lot more, actually. You've been involved for a long time, and you used to be a rapper, quite successful one. Also, you told me actually you sold this place out, the big hole downstairs. But
also upstairs.
Also upstairs, okay. Everything. But you quit music. Can you explain why?
Well, a couple of reasons. The first and foremost reason, of course, is because I want to be more in touch with my faith, but also because the past decade it's been fairly impossible for me to sell my music because of the boycotts, because of the Zionist power inside of the music industry in all over the world, of course, but specifically here in Holland. We have like big groups like Universal Music Group. I was linked with Universal because I was doing business with one of the biggest hip-hop labels, if not the biggest hip-hop labels in Holland, called Top Notch. They were associated with Universal Music Group. And the director of the Universal Music Group Netherlands is Robert Baruch. That's a Zionist in itself. His daughter recently passed away in Israel. She was fighting for the IDF. These people are in the top of the industry, so it's very difficult for me. It was very difficult for me to sell my music, promote my music, get to my audience in a way that I could do independently without selling my stuff to others who can reach my public without, sharing my points, basically. So it was very, very difficult for me to make my money, to make my bread and butter with my music. So it went like 10 years of struggling like that until I basically said it's time for me to start shifting my creativity to something else. And that's what I'm trying to do right now. That's
great, and you're starting an independent media company as well. And what I do want to mention also in the interest of transparency when we're talking about the music industry, we're here at Paradiso today, and I'm very happy that we could be here and that we could have this event, and that's already quite something. We couldn't do this everywhere. So I'm grateful for that and for all the people working here, and you know, we're gonna, yes. Please give all of them a big round of applause. But I do have a critical remark for the director specifically. So this is not against the employees, but for the director, because we did actually invite somebody else who was supposed to be here, Mohammed Khatib. He's the European coordinator of Samidun. And he's being criminalized, so we're talking about repression here. So we thought it would be a very great speaker to have, because he's being from all the top of the Belgian government. He lives in Brussels. They're basically threatening to take his residency and to deport him. He's a refugee. He's a Palestinian, and we were told that and the reason they give him for threatening him is because he supports the right to armed resistance, which is actually also supported by UN resolutions, as Lowkey has already mentioned. But apparently we were not supposed to have that kind of sharp discussion here. So I do want to say that, and even though, again, this is better than most places, and I'm grateful for that, but I think we need to be critical that even in these supposedly good places, we're not entirely free yet. So let that be known also. So Lowkey, I wanted to move to you next, because you're a musician as well. You have faced a lot of pressure as well from Zionist lobbies, other interests probably as well, to basically get you cancelled, get you censored. Can you talk a little bit about that and what it takes to, you know, you didn't quit music, so what does it actually take? Like, what kind of advice would you have for, you know, some of the younger artists here who do want to make it?
I think I can definitely relate to Appa's experience in the British context to some extent. What I would say is that the kind of repression which is practiced on artists outside of Palestine is really the application and the extension of the kind of things which is practiced on Palestinians. So for instance, the Palestinian poet Darien Tator had a poem called Resist My People, Resist Qawimhum Ya Sha'bi Qawimhum. She put it on her Facebook, and she was then arrested by the Israelis and eventually spent some time in prison and then some time on house arrest, and was then given an award by Oxfam when she exited the jail. And one of the stories that she told from her time within the Israeli dungeon was that when she asked for a pen and a paper to write her lyrics, she was told that you, especially you, shall not be given a pen and a paper. So she took the zip from her jacket and wrote poems on the wall of her cell. And what we have to remember is that you have people across Palestine being arrested by the Israelis for posts on social media. Around 15 journalists in prison now for the crime of quote-unquote incitement through things they've published online. So this is really the way in which Israel attempts to establish full spectrum dominance in the information sphere, and even within the Arabic language. And so the problem is that us as artists that are trying to practice our right to expression within countries where there has been an increased integration between the security services in our own countries and the Israelis. So in the case of the Netherlands, you have a deal that was signed with a subsidiary of Elbit Systems, which is Israel's largest arms manufacturer, to outsource the hacking of people's phones that the Dutch police carried out to a subsidiary of Elbit Systems, to an Israeli company. Now this is, any understanding of sovereignty says you should not do things like that. The very same kind of arrangement exists in Britain, whereby when the police in Britain hack someone's phone, they use something called Celebrite, which is an Israeli intelligence company. So particularly since 2012, in actually the most consequential policy that Netanyahu passed on a global level, but the least acknowledged, shall we say, it has seen a proliferation of Israeli tech companies. It's out of that 2012 revolution that you get the NSO group, which has the Pegasus spyware, which in the British context, you had believed to be 400 phones in Britain hacked by Pegasus, including one in the office of Boris Johnson while he was Prime Minister of the country. So I think there's a direct correlation between the type of repression that we face within these countries. And obviously, comparatively speaking, is less than the repression which exists in other places around this particular issue, but it's still significant repression. There's a direct correlation between the integration of Israeli security services and the security services of our own countries and the way that stuff is being rolled out. You also have in Britain a big campaign to push the IHRA definition, which now the struggle is the lobby, the Zionist lobby in Britain is trying to pressure the British police to apply the IHRA in criminal cases.
Can you explain very shortly for the people that don't know the definition and what's wrong?
It's just basically a way of outlawing criticism of Israel and of Zionism, but it's not being applied legally. It started to be applied legally. And so what their main aim now is actually to remove the police commissioner, Mark Rowley, because he hasn't been willing to push that. And so really the obstacles for them in the UK context are number one, the police, number two, the CPS, which decides whether you prosecute someone, number three, the judges, and number four, the juries. Because if it was down to the Israel lobby and their supporters within the political class, so many of us would be in jail. So many of us would be. But the problem is the police are unable to really follow those things to that end, because often it just doesn't stand up. It doesn't have legs. Like the type of thing that is being put up against Appa. I don't know enough about the Dutch context, but I doubt it will have legs. And
I actually got a link from the police 2 days ago to get the information from my phone, because the physical phone is still with them. But they sent me a link of Celebrite.
There you go.
So it's funny that you said that.
So
crazy,
therefore,
crazy.
in the Netherlands, they're also using Celebrite. It's very, very. I mean, even the Russian government were using it up until Ukraine. The Pakistani intelligence services use it. The Saudi intelligence services use it to hack their own citizens. The UAE use it also in a deal which was put together by the former head of Mossad. So it has been a major subterfuge and a Trojan horse through which Israel has been able to insinuate itself into the security systems of other countries.
Yeah, it's and you know we might be actually governed soon by a head of the Dutch Secret Service, so you know it's coming very close. But of course we're in Amsterdam right now, and especially with the last month of not just in Amsterdam, but some of the most intense protests and repression of them was the student movement in Amsterdam, which of course is supporting a full boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel and Israeli higher education institutions. And of course you work in higher education, and maybe you can explain a little bit of what we have been seeing the last month, and also specifically on how Dutch higher education is implicated actually with Israel.
Yeah, so also that has a longer and wider context. And I think it's important to know that students and staff at universities have been mobilizing for years when it comes to Palestine. Most universities have adopted the so-called decolonial studies or decolonial curricula. But students and staff have noted that it's only decolonial in theory but not in practice. Students have also for years been trying to organize events on Palestine because knowledge on Palestine, you know, knowledge production, classes, readings, literature that students get to read is still also very much lacking. Good in-depth knowledge on Palestine, the context, settler colonialism, etc. And many of those events were often either prevented or made very difficult to organize. And this again, so with every war in Gaza, but also in between, there has been a surge in trying to organize events. And it also happened this time. But this time, what even became a louder demand of the students is two things: disclose ties and cut the ties. And what students mean with that is that many universities in the Netherlands, they have institutional ties to Israeli universities or other companies that profit of or are complicit in human rights violations. And again, according to international law and Dutch law, you cannot knowingly contribute to human rights violations. So what the students and staff are demanding is first disclose. So first you have to be transparent and show the ties that that the university has with mainly Israeli universities, but also other organizations like Zionist lobby organizations or companies that profit, and then to cut the ties. And this comes following a call from Palestinian civil society in the beginning of the 2000s, where they say, you know, one way for you to support Palestinian resistance is by calling on your organizations, academic institutions, to cut those ties. But again, what we have seen is that university administrators didn't take students seriously. So students showed them that they are talking serious and occupied a lot of campuses. They held teach-ins, sit-ins, encampments, saying, you know, life cannot go on as usual while we are contributing to genocide, right? So we don't want to go to classes, we don't want to take exams until you act on that. And well, like also in the United States, mainly in the United States, I think, in many other places, they were met with grave violence by the police, who were called for by the administration of the universities. Students were arrested, they were beaten, etc. And actually, I also want to just let you all know that, you know, we're all here today for the ELSC, and I think you're doing great work. But also just knowing that there is an organization such as the European Legal Support Center has really been a great help for many of the students and staff, because, you know, they know, like, if we get in trouble, we have an organization that can help us. We have an organization that can have provide legal support. So I think that also really emboldens also in that by just existing, you already are contributing a lot. But yeah, so again, how they are complicit. So again, so many universities have exchange programs with Israeli universities. There was a recent Dutch newspaper article that many students, Dutch students who went for exchange programs, were actually living in university dorms on occupied land, so illegally occupied land by Israel. And they were sitting there in dorms, not knowing that they were actually being, you know, living illegally on occupied land. It's also research programs, so a lot of research programs that they have with Israeli universities. And many, especially the technical universities in the Netherlands, they have like a lot of research cooperation on technical programs, which again are being used for making manufacturing weapons or other technical stuff. So it's research, it's exchange programs, but it's also about investing in programs in research or in other companies. And we have seen that again, universities first they say, well, we don't want to cut the ties because we don't want to silence critical Israeli scholars. And there's a very great book by an author called Maya Wind called, what's it called?
Towers of Ivory and Steel.
Exactly, thank you. Which tells you exactly how Israeli universities are complicit in human rights violations. And again, the call for a boycott, divestment is on institutional ties and not on individuals, but the universities keep saying that, knowing that, for example, lately, I think a few weeks ago, the majority of Israeli professors have called for more repression on their campuses against people who speak out, mainly Palestinian students who are studying at Israeli universities. So the question is, where are those liberal leftist Israeli scholars? But the second is, again, the call is really to cut the institutional ties. And the students are going on, they're not stopping.
Yeah, and there have been a couple of victories, yeah. And especially in the applied sciences, there have been already a couple of victories where ties were cut. And even if it didn't happen in the University of Amsterdam, you know, we do know that when those kinds of big actions happen, it makes all of them nervous. So it all builds up to each other. So keep up the struggle. We don't have that much time left, so I don't want to close this part without, I think, asking the most important question, which is what can people here today do after they leave, apart from donating, of course, but what are the ways they can support the struggle? And I'm happy to hear multiple perspectives, because obviously everybody has different lives and can contribute in different ways. So this is a question for all of you, or whoever wants to pick it up. Please. All right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as you said before, I think the struggle for liberation for Palestinians didn't start in October, so we are kind of too late already, but still we can act. We are not powerless. We can disrupt, occupy, protest, and we are not alone. Like, there is a whole movement behind you, and yeah, I think, like, as ELSC, the legal work we are doing, like, without all this movement, activism, students, academics, journalists, employees, like all of you, can do something, whether it's at your job, at school, as consumers. So I think this is really important to acknowledge, and also just keep supporting and loving each other, especially in those hard times. So yeah.
Well, as we say at demonstrations, there is only one solution: intifada, revolution. So that's one thing we should always do. But I also think, so again, I'm mainly an academic and a researcher, and I think for us, the responsibility lies on exposing power relations, on showing the hypocrisy by producing knowledge and analyzing what is happening, writing about it, talking about it. And I really think that's more for the longer term. It's always important to understand and to contextualize. But for direct action, I think we have to remain like a pain in the ass of people in power. So disrupt, yeah.
I would say educate yourself first and foremost. Just educate yourself. Don't be scared. Know that everything that you do, say today may be criminalized, framed, whatever they may say, do. Know that the future will tell the truth. So don't ever feel the fear in your heart. Don't let it block you. Don't let it make you walk away. Be strong. Educate yourself. Educate the youth. That's the future generation. That's why they crack down on the students, because they know these are the future journalists. These are the future leaders of this country, of Europe, of the world. So don't be scared. Educate yourself. Be strong and look forward to the future, because that's the only way we're going to change this bullshit.
So one thing I would say in the case of ELSC, the Ghassan Abu Sitta situation, this was a surgeon who was in Gaza throughout the early period of the genocide. And because of what he witnessed and because of what he saw, when he was in Gaza, his family were visited by counter-terror police in Britain and interrogated by them. He then came home, and then he tried to enter France, was sent back, tried to enter Germany, was sent back. And the ELSC, as far as I understand, took up his case and were able to remove that ban on him. So now he is able to travel within the Schengen. And the lesson from that is that, no, is that not the case?
Not in the Netherlands.
He's not allowed to come to the Netherlands.
Wasn't allowed, but they changed it back.
Yes, but he couldn't enter anyway.
No, he could. He could.
Yes.
Yeah. So my understanding is that the ban has been lifted. It doesn't mean he's come and entered, but as far as I understand, the ban has been lifted. And that the lesson from that is that if you fight, you might not win, but if you don't fight, you definitely won't win. So therefore, your only option is to fight. In the case of my side of things, we have an organization called Palestine Action, and we have succeeded in permanently shutting down 3 sites of Israel's largest arms company, Elbit Systems, in Britain. The first of them was in Oldham, and it was a subsidiary of Elbit Systems by the name Ferranti Technologies. And the pressure was so massive on the company because you had the local community set up stalls in the town centre telling people about the factory. You had the local community going door to door around the factory telling people what was being produced there. But you also had Palestine Action entering the factory and shutting it down so it was not able to function. We did it again and 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 again until the company was sold at a loss by Elbit Systems. Now, along that journey, our people were taken into court. Now, all of the cases from Oldham, they entered as the accused, but they left as the accuser. This was the first time before you got near the ICJ that Israel's crimes were brought before a court of law in the Western world, in Britain. It happened with the Raytheon 9 also in Ireland, in Derry, and really that was the inspiration for Palestine Action. Because you take the crimes into the courtroom, you present the crimes to a judge and a jury, and they come to the conclusion, the wise conclusion in my opinion, that there is absolutely no comparison between a person walking into an arms factory, stopping it from functioning, and what the arms factory is doing and exporting. Britain is a signatory to the Arms Trade Treaty, which says that Britain should not make exports if they may be used for violations of international humanitarian law. So Britain is breaking the laws that it supposedly espouses to uphold in its arms sales and exports to the Israelis. And we have launched hundreds of operations against their sites. Not only did we shut down the factory in Oldham, we shut down the headquarters permanently in London, in Holborn, of Elbit Systems. And in addition to that, recently, we permanently shut down and vacated another subsidiary of Elbit Systems in Tamworth, Elite KL. It was sold, again, at a loss. Because water breaks down rock. Water breaks down rock. Exactly, slowly and surely and consistently. And that is what is required in this long struggle. Zionism as a movement has always been top-heavy and granular. Our resistance to it must take on an attritional and incremental nature, meaning that we are willing to continually press on the same spot again and again like a drip. And actually, a lot of the way that we understand Israel's assertions of power within the countries we live in, Israel understands those to be signs of its success out in the world. Actually, those are pressure points. And when some of those pressure points, particularly when it comes to the manufacturing of arms, they respond like an open door when you apply pressure to them. Because these companies can only function on the basis of secrecy. In the case of Leicester, we had people shut down the factory for 6 days in a row during Ma'arakat Saif al-Quds in 2021. And what happened? The police said to local people, help us get these people off the top of this factory. And local people said, no, we're with them. And then police said to the fire brigade, please come, help us take these people down from the factory. And do you know what the fire brigade's union said? Said, no, we're with them. And so what you have is the necessity to polarize particular communities around specific issues. And the weakest link in the chain for Israel right now is the arms trade. It is the weakest link in the chain because it is a house of cards built on sand. It has the least ability to wiggle around and twist your intentions. No, actually what we're saying is Britain should uphold its own laws better than it already is. And so what you instantly bring into question is whether that whole arrangement is legally right. And in addition to that, one of the biggest achievements of Palestine Action is the British Ministry of Defence cancelling £280 million worth of contracts with Elbit Systems. And do you know why the British government did that? The exact phrase that was used was operational sovereignty. It brings question marks on operational sovereignty. So what you have directly there is Palestine Action bringing out that contradiction between Britain allowing Elbit Systems to have involvement in its nuclear submarines. Because obviously when Palestine Action went into the Bristol factory, what was showed on camera, some of the elements and the components which would then be used in Britain's nuclear submarines. That's what you called an exposed company. You don't need, it's bad for business. You have a toxic brand, an exposed company, everyone knows Elbit now. Yeah? Everyone associates that company with what they're seeing in Gaza. That's not what they want. So, in my personal opinion, we need to think as long-term as possible, as strategically as possible, and we need to look at specific targets that are weak and move to them again and again and again.
¡Viva la revolución!
So, as I promised, I will get back to you, and this is your moment. I was told that we went over time, so I'm going to do one round of questions, so don't be shy. If you really have a burning question, you need to raise your hand straight away and not be shy. So I see 3 hands. We're going to do those 3, and then that's that. So 1, 2, and then third in the back, right here. And there's someone coming with, oh, you need my mic? Okay, there you go. Yes.
I just want to answer the last question that
All right, but try to do it in a microphone and keep it short.
I just want to answer the last question that you asked, what we can do as normal people. I just want to say 3 words. It's boycott, boycott, and boycott. That's
All right, thanks for that. Umaya.
That was short and powerful, so yeah, be like that.
In addition to boycott, we have to think of the day after. At the moment, all humanitarian aid professionals say there is no way you can get humanitarian aid inside Gaza. Ilan Pape said that between November and December, Israel will try to get everybody out, and instead of calling it ethnic cleansing, they will be calling for the world to help with refugees. So we have to be one step ahead. If the only way is to get the Palestinians out of Gaza to help them, we would like to launch today something called Bring Gaza Home. The only place the Gazans or the Palestinians in Gaza, who are 85% refugees, is to get them inside today's Israel, inside the border, get them humanitarian aid, and then see about return. We would like you to go check bringgazahome.com and promote this idea. Thank you.
I think actually, because Umaya talked with me before, we have a slide for this. Maybe we can go to the... then you can find it.
On the wall, the papers.
There's also, okay, so there's also papers on the wall. You can find it. It was in the back there, Max. There, you can see the hand over there in the back.
Great.
And of course, the very legal entity of Israel, their recognition even in the UN is based on the right of return of all the 8 million Palestinians. This is very important to remember. Like, Israel does not have a right to exist actually as an apartheid state. Everybody has the right to return, so this is a very important demand. Are we already at the...
I'm here.
Yes, great. Yeah, go ahead.
You, Chris, posed a question to Karim asking how the liberation of Palestine plays a big role in the global liberation. You then gave us a lot of information, which I loved, but I do want to know, like, if people ask, but why, how about Congo? How about Sudan? How about, like, Palestine, the liberation of Palestine plays such a huge role, and I would like an answer, how you would answer to that question.
Who is you?
Karim.
Karim.
So sorry, Lowkey.
Yeah,
I don't know how to call
no
you.
problem. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think, particularly in the case of the Congo, you have a situation where the Rwandan army is backing a proxy and Rwanda has obviously been built up by the United States, is a key part of AFRICOM, is also backed by the British and the Israelis in different ways. And you have seen during a period of displacement of millions of people in the Congo, the exponential rise in the extraction of very key resources that are essential to things that we use around the world. So for instance, the phones that we use all have multiple pieces of the Congo in them. I don't necessarily see it as an either-or question. I think it's about understanding the way powerful lobbies function. Part of the reason that people don't associate what happens in Congo to the material relations is because all of us are deeply involved in the growth of Apple. You know, how many people associate the growth of a company like Apple with children mining for coltan and cobalt more than they associate someone like Steve Jobs? How many people associate the growth of Tesla with the extraction of resources in different places, including Congo, with the people that extract that rather than someone like Elon Musk? You know, it's a problem of our society as a whole, you know. I mean, Israel does, you know, unfortunately have some connection to what happens in Congo in that its biggest export is diamonds, which Dan Gertler is a particular figure who has loomed large in the Congo. I understand to some extent where people are coming at it from that angle when they say, why don't you care about this other issue and you care a lot about Palestine? I don't think it's an either-or question, but I think what it requires is the respect to research and to look at these issues beyond the knee-jerk emotional response. I think all of these things require study and attention. In my own case, Palestine is something that I've spent a long, long time looking into and studying, so I feel I have I'm better situated to really publicly comment on it and then take some form of action, because I feel I have a better basis with which to interact with it.
I would love to actually chip in also as an organizer, because we've organized this night now on Palestine, but we've organized quite a few nights also on the Congo. Two specific organizations I'd like to mention that we've worked with is Friends of the Congo and Congo Week. If you want to have more research on the Congo, they're very, very good. But I also want to mention that all of those struggles are deeply, deeply, deeply interconnected. Like what we've seen in the Congo, especially since '94, is basically invasions by Rwanda and Uganda, which are fully armed, backed by the United States. Also, very similar storyline. Supposedly out of genocide guilt, right? Rwandan genocide. And then they commit an even larger genocide with 6 million people killed in the east of the Congo, supposedly out of guilt. So when we target the United States, when we target Israel, when we target Paul Kagame in Rwanda, like all of these are like pinpoints on a map. Like wherever you hit, you're hitting the beast of the empire, basically. So I don't think they're separate struggles at all. I think they're interconnected struggles. And I think if we look at the organizations who are really putting their lives on the line for these struggles, they are always in solidarity with each other. They are always in solidarity with Gaza, with Congo, with Sudan, with all of these struggles across the world. So, you also want to say something? Okay, then you're Dina, you're getting the final word, because we need to get to the final word. Yes.
Oh, already. Oh, you don't want to say something now. Are you okay? Okay.
Viva la revolución!
That's very important. Yeah, well, maybe also two things, very short. But first, I think it's also important, again, to question why somebody raises the question, what about? And it's called the whataboutism. So if they really want to ask, so why did you choose Palestine as a case and not, for example, Congo, and they really want to understand, then I think it's a good question to think about and say, well, actually, because I invested it, I know about it, I learned about it, I feel affiliated, I feel some affinity. But usually they ask that question to say, well, why are you using Israel as an exception? Are you anti-Semitic because you're singling out Israel? And this is a whole different reason of asking that question. I think in here, I think it's very important to first say indeed how it's all interconnected. So I think again, in many places in the world, colonialism was kind of exchanged by multinational companies that are continuing the colonial rule, and Israel is an extension of Western colonialism still in action. And you cannot understand the one without the other. But I do think that the thing why Palestine is such a clear case is because it also shows very clearly the complicity of the global north in it, and again also in, for example, Congo and Sudan they are, but it's more hidden, and here it's very clear, so you can definitely take that as a case study to show how Western imperialism is still going on as we speak. But I actually wanted to say something about the first comment, which wasn't a question, but I still want to answer. The boycott. And I think, yes, so the BDS call, the boycott, divestment, sanctions, is very important. Because as we already heard also before, money talks, so pressuring companies, harming their reputation by showing and exposing that they are complicit in rights violations works because companies care about money. But I think we should never forget that boycott is seen as one of the tools for a greater end, which is the liberation of Palestine. The end isn't boycott. Boycott is just one of the many tools that we have. So I agree, boycott is very important. I think there's much more things that we can do beyond and besides boycott.
Thank you. And with that, I'm gonna close off this part of the day. But we'll have really, really great musical programs coming up. But before I mention that, I want to give a big round of applause for our panel. And I also want to mention an old-time friend of mine who's DJing. You'll be hearing him. You heard him before. He's also going to be here while we're waiting for the live acts. His name is Palestina Robotica. He's a Palestinian Dutch musician and DJ, and he'll be playing for us in a bit. And also, before I forget to mention, you can go in the back. There you can find there's a stand. With two people. One is Marianne Jaraisi. She's a Palestinian designer and a ceramic artist residing in Amsterdam. And she'll be selling some of her art to raise funds. And also you can find Plant een Olijfboom, which really does too many things to mention. But one of the key things they do is basically planting olive trees in Palestine to prevent Palestinians from being evicted from their lands. So check them out. And of course, please also donate. There's all on the walls, but you can also find it on the event page, the link. And with all that being said, I thank you for coming. Stay here, and we'll have musical performances soon. Thank you.